Today's Gospel of Matthew seems fairly straightforward. God the Father is the landowner who lays out the vineyard and leaves it in the care of the tenants. The tenants are to care for the land, prepare harvest, return the rewards of that harvest to the landowner at the required time. I think in our current lockdown state, if that vineyard was supplying wine to us lockdown Melburnians, it could be a very profitable venture. But alas, in this gospel, the tenants don't return what is owed to the landowner. They beat and ultimately kill representatives of the landowner, one of them even being his son. I could reflect, after reading this gospel, on how maybe we're the chosen people. How are we keeping God's vineyard running? Are we ready to pay what's owed? Are we grateful, hardworking and honest, happy to serve? On another hand, like many traditional readings of this gospel, I could reflect on the vineyard being God's church and the tenants being the church's leadership. I think that could be a really useful reflection, particularly given how St Kevin's parish over the last few years has given a lot of time, prayer and effort towards our responses to Plenary 2020. If I was thinking about more broader contemporary Australian issues, my mind might wander to what this gospel might reveal to us about the acknowledgement of and attitudes to traditional Indigenous owners of the lands, the waters, the skies, and the bounties that they offer us. On one level, I could ask, are we managing responsibly those vineyards that are the natural environment on which we are merely tenants? And do we return the rewards as they are owed to the owners? Do we divert too much water from the Murray? Do we demand too much production of our soils? Do we sincerely acknowledge traditional owners with our words and with our actions? All of these are valuable reflections to have. But today I'd like to share a much more simple reflection, particularly because of the call of positivity and light from the second reading of St Paul to the Philippians about filling your mind with everything that is good and true. I'd like to reflect that the first line of today's gospel includes the word another. Jesus said to the chief priests and the elders of the people, "Listen to another parable." Although Jesus is able to deliver parables and allegories that cut close to the bone for the priests and elders of his time, and still make us really examine ourselves, our minds, our hearts and motives here in 2020, Jesus is so generous and patient. It was many lessons that he offered us. Another parable, another miracle, another address to an audience of questioning academics and politicians of his time that we too now benefit from. He knows we need to hear his message over and over again, told through a myriad stories and parables, so that the messages will sink in, bit by bit, heart by heart, and have impact on us, the leaders of now. Aren't we lucky? Are we that patient and persistent ourselves? Do we consider how to keep going and communicating bit by bit, heart by heart, in our own quests to uncover injustice and right systems? Recently, the US lost a giant of the equal rights movement, a small-framed, bespectacled Jewish woman called Ruth Bader Ginsburg. RBG, as she is affectionately known by millions of people beyond the US and in human rights circles across the world, also understood this patience, this persistence that was required in her decades-long fight to have women's legal rights recognised. If you've got a chance to see one of the documentaries about her, you'll see that unlike in the feature film version, RBG's win didn't come in one big show-stopping landmark case. Ruth, her husband and team achieved a landmark decision through small cases that chipped away at the underlying assumptions and established precedents that made the legal system of the day bias against women and minorities. Many of these small cases were on the most seemingly boring and mundane pieces of law. But all of them were laying part of the foundations, or to use Jesus' vineyard analogy, perhaps preparing the soil. Patiently, persistently, and frequently through story, RBG and her team laid brick by brick the foundations of those landmark decisions that eventually led to equal access, equal pay, and equal rights for women. What added up to be enormous leaps in human rights that echoed across oceans and to other nations. Ruth understood that those in power couldn't necessarily see the bias that was built into the system. So too with Jesus in his time. As such, the stories had to be continually laid out. Another story, another piece of case law, another parable. Regardless of the injustice you long to right and the system you might seek to change, remember that little word, another, and the patience and persistence accompanying it can inspire us to not only keep examining ourselves and how we communicate, but working to ensure that the vineyards in our own backyard can remain fruitful and productive.